everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some creamy tomato basil soup, some chicken Italian melt, and nectarine turnovers, not peach turnovers, but they're like the same thing. So let's start out by getting our onion cut up for our soup. I'm going to save a little bit of this red onion for our sandwiches. Now, normally I would use a yellow onion, but apparently I have 10 red onions and no yellow onions. So we're going to use these up when I go to the store this weekend. I will get some more onions, which is always funny because I typically buy like 40 onions at a time in there. So we're going to take off this whole kind of outer layer. And then again, I'm going to reserve a little bit for our sandwiches. I don't even know if I need that much because a little bit of onion can go a long way. And then the rest of these we're just going to dice up for our soup and let them start to saute. And then we'll put some fresh tomatoes in, fresh basil, kind of get it cooking up. And then we'll blend everything into a really creamy, delicious soup. Because Teddy, he's getting a little bit more interested in eating right now. And he's been wanting savory foods, not really anything sweet or cold, which is what you kind of would hope that they would eat after their tonsillectomy. But I'm hoping he'll eat soup because he loves soup. Let's get a little bit of our olive oil in here. We're going to put in about a tablespoon. And then I'm going to throw in my onions here. Just going to pick up my cutting board. Be easier. I'll let those start to saute up. Okay. And before we go over to working on our peach turnovers, I am just going to prep up our tomatoes so that once these onions have began to saute and get nice on there, we can throw the tomatoes in and let them start cooking up. So I'm just going to kind of decore each tomato, and which is really just me sticking in my knife and kind of doing a circular cut around. That core never gets cooked all the way through, so just take it out. Otherwise, you'll have like a really hard, chewy lump in your soup. You could also take it off like that, but you lose more of the tomato that way. So I like to kind of core it. Here we go. I think they make like little, I know they sell those like strawberry cores, which I think, I feel like that's going way more work than just using a knife to cut it off. But I wonder if you had a whole bunch that you had to do. Like if you made preserves or jams, that might be useful, but I feel like a knife just works great. Okay, so we've got these all just about cored up. And then we are going to be blending them, so I'm not doing necessarily a small chop on them. I'm just going to kind of, eighth them. That way they'll let out their juices nicely. And because that's going to be really the base of our stock for our creamy tomato basil soup. I will be adding about a cup of chicken broth to it, but it's mainly just the juices from the tomatoes, which is why I love to use fresh tomatoes because they're extra juicy. Okay. Prep these, and we're using about, I think I had 8 tomatoes in all here. And then we're going to go work on after this, I'll give my onions a little stir, and then we're going to go work on our nectarines and getting them starting to stew for our turnovers. Let me grab a spoon here for our soup. That way we can kind of stir it up. I'm going to turn mine down to about a 6 now that the Dutch oven is nice and hot. We're going to let that cook up nicely. Okay. Oh, well, thank you, Sharon. We always appreciate that. We're going to I have 4 nectarines here. You could use peaches as well, but I am a lover of nectarines over peaches because I do not like the fuzzy skin on peaches. I don't like even touching the fuzzy skin on peaches, But we're going to get these cut out. I might grab another cutting board for this. That way I can slice them up. Also, a nice thing about nectarines is you don't have to keep on the skin or you don't have to peel off the skin if you don't want to. Nectarine skins are really tender. They're not like an apple skin or like any of those other kind of tougher skins. They're really delicate, so they cook up kind of nicely. Just making sure I get off as much of this as possible. And I kind of just cut around wherever I feel that kind of pit in there. Then I'll just move my blade around it. But I will say that's the only thing about peaches and nectarines or plums. Stone fruits, they have that big kind of pit in the middle, which just makes kind of slicing them up a little bit more tricky than, say, an apple. But we got through them pretty fast. Now I'm going to peel off the skin on some of them, and some of them I'll leave it on. Doesn't bother me too much. I'm just going to get some of the major ones off. And that way they won't, get too stringy in there. But you could definitely leave them on if they don't, they're going to be more mild of a skin than an apple. I always say apples, you've got to peel them off because those kind of get a little bit tough. But I'm not going to freak out if there's a little bit of the skin on here. Now peaches, definitely peel the peaches. And this is going to be, we're going to make a little fruit kind of base for our nectarine turnovers. I have some puff pastry that I thawed out. I will say, yes, you can make your own puff pastry, and it's delicious, but there's a lot of time involved in making puff pastry. So frozen puff pastry works wonderful, gives you pretty much the same end product with a fraction of the work. There we go. And just a few more that we're going to just slice up here. And I will say, I find using just like a paring knife, it's not even a paring knife, it's a serrated steak knife, but having a smaller blade just allows you to have a little bit more precision and control over it. I like the serrated because I think it just makes things a little bit easier to cut through. There we go. And then we're going to chop it up into kind of like smaller pieces because I don't want them to be super big. I want them to get tender. But when you're eating a turnover, you don't want to take a bite and then like a huge piece of peach comes out or a nectarine comes out on you. I feel like everything uses peaches over nectarines, and they're really similar in flavor and they cook up pretty much the same. But I'm just so used to it's always like peach pie, peach cobbler, peach this. It's never nectarines. Okay, one last one. And we're going to stir our onion just a smidge. And then we'll get these kind of chopped up and into our pot to cook over there. Okay, there we go. I am going to let them kind of caramelize for just a little bit. I'm just going to wash my tomato knife off just a second because I'll use it to chop these guys up. And what I'm going for is kind of just, nothing too big, but just smaller things. They will get a little bit smaller as you cook them up and those natural juices come out. So you don't have to make them itty bitty small. But think about like anytime you have a hand pie, like those hand pies, those small pies, just think how they have them. They're more chopped up in smaller pieces versus slices. Let's save that one. I'll peel that skin off in just a second. And I will say, you definitely want to cut them smaller. And then I am going to cook mine up in a little sauce pot because I like them to get extra tender. And sometimes with turnovers, there's, the method where you just toss everything with the sugar and the spices and then, you bake it up. But the puff pastry doesn't bake long enough to really get them tender and juicy. It's not like a pie where it bakes, significantly longer. So I always like to stew mine and make it kind of so they're tender already when we fill them up versus trying to let the oven do it. I think they always come out too firm, the fruit in it. There we go. Last little bit. Let me peel off the skins on these two. They eluded me the first time around. And I will say, if you have little kids, little ones, like under 2, you definitely want to peel them off because I will say, fruit skins are one things that little kids just always choke on for some reason. It's always like they bite into an apple and then they don't realize that skin's there. So do peel it off for the little ones. Let's grab a smidge of butter over here to put in my little sauce pot. So this is like a 1.5 quart sauce pot that we're going to be using for this. I'm going to turn on my back burner. I'm using a little bit of butter because that's going to help with the cornstarch. I just helps it kind of gel up and thicken up nicely. And we'll add that in towards the end because when I think of a turnover, a hand pie, you're going to have that, it's like those cheap ones you buy, that kind of jelly inside, sticky mixture, and not necessarily a liquidy one. So let's let those start to cook. We'll add in some lemon juice in just a second, but our onions are starting to get nice and brown and caramelized. So we're going to throw in about a teaspoon of garlic. You can definitely mince up your own at home if you wanted, probably about 3 to 4 cloves. Give this a good stir, and we're going to let that kind of saute for about 30 seconds. Let those flavors come out, because once we add in our tomatoes, they're going to sweat their liquids out really quick, and therefore they won't have as much, the garlic won't have as much time to saute on the bottom of the pan. I'm going to put our tomatoes in. This is 8 vine ripe tomatoes going in. And then we'll give them a little bit of a stir. And then I'm going to turn my Dutch oven down to about a 4. And we're going to let them kind of simmer and cook up. Start those liquids coming out and get tender and flavorful. Then we'll add in some fresh basil, spices, our chicken broth in here in just a little bit. But let's get the rest of our peaches going. So I have a lemon left over from the other day that I zested. And so we're going to use this lemon juice in there. Let me grab my juicer real quick. And we're going to squeeze in, and this is going to help keep those, gives you just this nice little zing on them when they cook up that kind of cuts through the sweetness. And that acidity, it's just something, you think, oh, why are you adding? It just adds an extra layer of complexity to it. It's same with apple pies. You just need a little bit something that kind of cuts through on some of that. So just juice from half a lemon. There we go. And then I'm going to grab my brown sugar here. Wash my hands just a second. And we're going to put in a little less than a cup of brown sugar. I'm not even going to pack my brown sugar down. I'm just going to lightly scoop it in. It's going to be closer to 3/4 of a cup. There we go. And that's going to help make that sweet base that's going to flavor it up, because the puff pastry in and of itself isn't necessarily sweet. It can be, it doesn't have a lot of sugar. So you need that filling to really pop with the sweetness and the flavor. We will make a little bit of a glaze to go over it, but you want that filling to really make up for the outside being, just kind of a crunchy pastry layer. There we go. And you can see there's just now starting to melt down. And then we're going to add in some spices. Oh,
Yep, someone said.
we lost one. I am like the queen of knocking things out of my bowls because I'm not a gentle cook. And then let me grab a measuring spoon, and we're going to add in some cinnamon and some vanilla. And the vanilla really helps mellow it out and plays really well with the cinnamon that we're going to use. So I'm going to add about a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we're going to add in a teaspoon of cinnamon. Yeah. Heaping teaspoon. And then a pinch of salt. And that salt is really going to help bring out those flavors. Salt is a flavor enhancer. So it's not going to make it savory at all, but it's really going to make those flavors pop. Okay, let's give this a nice stir. Let's coat those all up. And then once we have like kind of like a good bubbling on them and they're nice and, starting to get tender, we'll throw in our cornstarch, but we're not going to do that until the very end. We need it to sweat out a bit more liquid and juices first. Here we go. Okay. Let's give ours a little stir here. And then I'm going to chop up my fresh basil and we'll let it in there. We're going to let it stew for a little while. I'm going to use all of this up. I had already used some out of it, so it's not quite that's, I guess, a 2-ounce container. And a lot of this weight is in stems. But tomato basil soup, I like to have lots of basil in it. So we're going to kind of pull these off and just take off some of my darker ones. I will say basil is one of those things that when you buy it from the store, if you don't use it right away, it starts to kind of go brown just like most of your fruits and everything. We're going to pull these guys off. There we go. And then we're going to mince it up. So we are going to blend it, but I find that even if you blend it, it's going to, you still got to mince it up because you're going to end up with like stringy pieces of basil. So give it a good, that's my chicken knife. Okay. So we're going to mince these up nice and fine. And that also is going to allow those flavors to come out because the more cuts on the basil leaf we make, the more of that basil essence and flavor will come out into our soup. There we go. And I will say basil is a fairly mild spice. When you eat it raw, yes, it's really potent, but when you cook it up, it definitely gets a bit more mild. Here we go. So we've got it up nice, and it will wilt down just like spinach or other leafy things. So this is about minced up. This is probably a half a cup of basil. And it's just going to add a great flavor to our soup. It always reminds me back in the day, I don't even know if they're still around, but there was Bread and Company, and I used to love to go there as a kid. And they had the best like tomato basil soup, and you could get it in a sourdough bowl. And I just love that place. And they had amazing fruit tea. I don't have them here in Nashville anymore, but they were so good. Okay, we're gonna let that stew just a little bit longer. I'm gonna add in my chicken bouillon and some water, so chicken broth. I'm gonna do a big heaping spoonful of chicken bouillon. This is going to add the saltiness to my soup. I might need a little bit more at the end, and I'll taste and see if we need that. But we're gonna start with that kind of really big heaping spoonful and a smidge more. There we go. I get all that flavor off. Most of the time I'm say don't use metal utensils in a lait crusade because of that enamel coating. But as long as you're not scraping it, you'll be fine. But metal utensils, just like a non-stick thing, they can scrape your enamel and then your pan can rust and whatnot. So you don't want to do that. This is a little bit more than a cup, but I'm going to add in just about a cup. I'll reserve a little bit in case I want to add some more later. But we're going to let that simmer. While we're doing that, I'm going to get our chicken ready for our sandwiches, and we'll cook those up, and that we're going to kind of assemble. So I've got 2 big chicken breasts here, and I'm going to fillet them in half. There we go. And that way, when I cook them up, they'll cook much faster, but they also won't be so huge on our sandwiches. And then I'm going to cut them into smaller pieces. So we'll cut, that way there'll be, a big piece of chicken on each sandwich. I'm making 6 sandwiches, but I'll have a little bit left over, which I think the kids will be happy because they love chicken. Here we go. Rinse my hands. And we're just going to marinate these up real quick, and then we're going to do the rest of the work on our turnovers so they can start baking. So I'm drizzling a little bit of Worcestershire sauce over it, which is going to give it the acid's going to kind of keep that chicken nice and juicy. And then we're going to sprinkle Italian spices over because we're kind of doing this Italian melt. Here we go. And then garlic salt. Shake, shake, shake. And then we're going to flip it over and do the same on the other side. I'm going to give this, while I'm over here, I'm going to give this a nice stir because look at how much juice is already coming out. Look at that. It's just going to be delicious for our filling for our, nectarine turnovers. There we go. Keep wanting to call it peach. It is not peach. They're nectarines, but and they're, I don't know why. My brain keeps saying peach, because I think peach is such a common thing. But if you're like me and you don't like that fuzz, I rarely buy peaches. The only time peaches come in my house is when my mom gets a big bushel off of the peach truck. And then she has so many because there's just 2 of them at home, and she's got this huge basket. So I end up with half of them, and then I've got to make something with them. There we go. So a nice little drizzle over, and then we'll do our Italian spices on it. Here we go. Italian.
What's your rule for marinating?
Marinate both sides. That way you have the flavor all the way through. You'll not have bland chicken. Got to do it both, especially if you're doing, this is what I say is my quick marinade. If you're going to marinate something in a bag for a long time, the bag will juice it, but quick marinades, both sides. Okay. Beautiful. I'm going to slide. Got to get all this stuff out of the way. And we're going to add in our cornstarch right now to help gel it up. And I'm just going to dust it over. You'll probably need maybe close to a tablespoon, but I just shake it and stir it in and then see if I need any more. You just never know how juicy some of your fruits are going to be. And I'm going to turn it down lower. But I want a nice gel to form. That way the liquids aren't pouring out of our turnovers. There we go. I think. There we go. So actually just about a tablespoon. That kind of thickened up nicely. So you want it to cling together because, again, you don't want it to just pour out. Let's build these turnovers. So I've got my puff pastry. I think this is just the Pepperidge Farm freezer one. And this is going to make 8 kind of big turnovers for me. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of flour down here just so I don't have any stickage. There we go. And I always give them a little bit of a roll when I'm using them because they can actually be pretty, they'll be really thick. And if you roll them a little bit thinner, then they're going to get a nicer bake on them. So each one of these should make 4 turnovers. So I'm just going to kind of cut down the middle and then cut them in half. So we have these kind of roughly the same size. Let me give this a stir. And then let me grab my parchment lined baking sheet. That way, when we fill these, I'm actually going to move this pan and do it here. It will be easier. It'll give me a little bit more space. Now, the trick is I'm going to actually fill them on my parchment paper. That way I can, I don't have to move them with that hot gel in there. Now, the trick is making sure that you put the right amount in it so you don't have any left over, but you don't have that you got the perfect amount in. So just a nice little scoop. It's about 1/4 of a cup. And then you're just going to go and then kind of pinch around. Yes, turnovers are typically a triangle, but I find it's just easier to do a square or a rectangle, I should say. And mainly because mine aren't squares. If I had taken the time to roll it out in a perfect square, yes, a triangle would be nice and easy, but I don't. So we're going to do it here. They'll still be just as good. And then just kind of pinch those edges together. And you see why we want to have a nice kind of thick layer or thick gel on them? Because if you had a soupy gel, you either would lose that delicious gel or it would just run out over everything. Here we go. And do the pinch. This one's more of a square, so I'll do a traditional one on here. Let's see, get a good amount of my nectarine filling, which we sweetened with brown sugar, cinnamon, lemon juice, and we cooked until nice and tender and thickened up with our cornstarch. And now we're using our puff pastry and we're just going to seal these edges over it, just like that. So there's our traditional one. Now, got my second roll of the puff pastry. You've got to make sure this takes like 45 minutes to an hour to thaw out. So you want to make sure it's thoroughly thawed out before you like try to use it, because if it's still frozen, you're going to end up like ripping it apart. I'll see if I can, take a little bit more gentle time with this one. I'm just going to kind of roll it out. See, this is what I try to do when I try to make a square. I make a funky shape. So rectangle it is. Okay. Slice down. And I suppose you could even make these smaller than you want. You know what I mean? Because these are pretty big turnovers, but I think they're going to disappear fast. I bet you they won't even make it to dinner time.
You have a question? Where'd you get that roller?
This is actually called a fondant roller, which I use most of the time unless I have some heavy duty rolling on it. I bought it on Amazon. I do believe I have it in my Amazon storefront, which there's a link to that on my page. I'm pretty sure, but I think it's Wilton's fondant roller. And I will say I got it back in the day. I'm going to actually do a triangle one here, so I have it kind of mirrored with this one. Back in the day when I was really big into making cakes and, doing fondant, But if you've ever had fondant, it's just not very good. I make my own with marshmallows, which is a little bit better, but good old buttercream is so much better. So here again, we're just gonna pinch the sides, hold that goo in, and then I'll rotate it to kind of make sure it's in there. And then when we're done with this, we are going to brush it with an egg wash, which will give you that beautiful kind of brown color, like that shiny coating, like shiny golden brown that you typically see on. Ooh, I did pretty good
Yeah, I
here.
have a question. Could you use the French pastry dough that's super flaky?
Yeah, I think so. You would have definitely a bit more of a flakier one, but I think that would be extra delicious. Puff pastry does flake up a bit, but the French pastry dough I think would make you even better one. There we go. So let's pinch these guys around. And that last one on. I'm going to turn that down. Give my soup a little love. Let's slide this over. This is our tomato basil soup. Right now we've got the tomatoes, basil, onions in there with some chicken broth. Okay, let's make up our final pastry. And look, I divided it perfectly. This one's a little big, but that's okay. That last peach in there. Our nectarine. Guys, I just can't do it. Even though I'm a firm believer that nectarines are the superior one. There we go. Although technically I think peaches are a bit healthier. Nectarines have more sugar in it. Okay, let's brush these bad guys up with some egg wash. I'm going to add 1 egg, a smidge of water, like a teaspoon or so. Then we're going to whip it, mix it together.
You have a question? Do you do any catering?
I do not do any catering, although I have catered a couple parties for my parents. I've made a couple meals for them, but no, my hands are pretty full with my 5 kids, their sports. I also do some consulting because I do have my doctorate, so I got to use my degree somehow. But no, I don't. That's what I said. I always said I don't think I would enjoy cooking if it was like that, like a chef where you have to put out food for people, and you have your HR problems, and there's always going to be grumbling. I can handle my 10-year-old being my critic, but I don't know if I'd want to do it. And I'm not big on making things look beautiful. I'm brushing these with my egg wash right now. My mixture, I've got 1 egg with about a teaspoon or so of water. This is going to give you that shiny golden brown color to it, which will make it delicious. And then I have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. And we're going to bake these for about 17 minutes. But before we pop these completely in the oven, I'm going to make a little slit in each one. And the reason is if you don't make this little slit in it, they're going to explode. So, because that liquid in there will steam up and they'll pop it out. So, a little bit of a slit to prevent the exploding because we want to eat these delicious puff pastries. So, it's going to go in the oven at 400 degrees for about 17 minutes or until they're golden brown. So we've got them going in, and then we're going to make a delicious glaze for them. That will add just a little bit of sweetness again for that kind of top on it, because that pastry, puff pastry is very mild. So it can be used, you can use it for both things like beef Wellington or turnovers or whatnot. Okay, let's get our show on the road here. Give this a little bit of a stir. I'm going to turn on my pan here, and we're going to heat up some oil because we're going to start sauteing our chicken for our Italian melts. There we go. So I'm going to add in about a tablespoon and a half, mainly because I'm using such a big pan. But if you're using a smaller one, you could use a little bit less. And let that heat up for just a second. I want to make sure I add my chicken in when it's nice and hot. While that's doing, I'm going to just clean up this area because I'm going to be using this as my assembly station for our sandwiches, which we had about 6 leftover rolls from last night's dinner. So I made a basic sourdough yeast roll last night, and then I kind of coated them with a onion, herb, butter, and sprinkled them with some poppy seeds. And I have 6 left, and I was like, oh, we can turn these into sandwiches because I'm a big fan of trying to make sure there's no waste in our house. And that's just a great way, is to just kind of reincorporate leftovers into another meal. Okay, put this over here. So for our Italian melts, we're gonna have our Italian seasoned sauteed chicken, pepperoni, hard salami. We're gonna use havarti cheese, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of marinara on, some red onions, and we'll kind of toast them up in the oven to get them nice and hot and gooey. Let's bring our stuff over here. Right there, but let's see. I think our chicken, let me test our chicken. Oh, I have a little bit of water over here, so I'll just use my finger in that. There we go. Good sizzle. That means my oil's nice and hot. I'm going to turn my burner now down to about a 6. And we're going to put our chicken in here, just kind of sear off. There we go. And I'm just going to do 4 at a time. I'm going to do my 4 biggest pieces, and then we'll let them kind of cook. And then we'll do the other 4. But these are what's going to go on our sandwiches. Okay, so while we're prepping on the sandwiches, I'm going to cut my buns in half. So these were the sourdough yeast rolls I made last night, just so you can see how soft and spongy they are. So they use about 2 teaspoons and 1/4 of yeast, but a 1/2 cup of sourdough discard, which just gives them that, you've got a little bit of that sourdough flavor, but it's something that you can make fairly quickly. These can be made in like an hour and a half because they need about an hour of rise time. They have 2 rises, so, but delicious. I'll cut these through. And then we're going to start kind of layering our cheeses. I'm going to bring this over. So I've got havarti cheese, which you can use provolone, mozzarella, but you want to use kind of a creamier cheese, like a white creamy cheese.
You have a question? Where do you find your discard recipes?
I just kind of create them on my own. A lot of times I'll take like a basic recipe and then I kind of adapt it to make it a discard recipe, because I find that it's really simple to kind of change them up, because you just have to reduce a little bit of the flour and the liquid intake in a recipe, and then, trial and error until you've got it about right. And I will say, like, a lot of times I have like a base recipe that I use, and the base recipe just allows you to then kind of change it up. Here we go. Look at this nice sear on them. Looking gorgeous. And I'm going to grab a plate off to remove these when they're done.
Why is it called discard? What is it?
Discard. So if you're making sourdough bread, you have a starter. I can show you my starter here, which is fermented flour and water. And as it ferments, you see bubbles in it, there's gas in it, but you have to feed your starter every couple of days. And so if you constantly were to feed it, it would keep growing and growing. So what you do is you discard half, or you take half out of the jar, and that's your discard. And then you feed your starter so it's nice and active and ready for it. So instead of just throwing away your discard, you can include it into recipes. And I will say it makes recipes have they're nice and moist, and it has a great flavor, and it has just some good prebiotics in there, and probiotics, so it's just kind of gut healthy as well. Okay, let's see. Can start layering. I've got some hard salami here. And then I'm going to just put kind of a slice on each side, because ideally I want my chicken in the middle. And these will fold in together when we have when we bake them up. But we'll bake them open, and then when they're done, we'll fold them. Here we go. So we've got our hard salami, and then we're going to use some pepperonis. And now, if you got deli cut pepperonis, that would work a little bit better, but I always have pepperonis here because I make a lot of homemade pizzas. So you put your pepperonis on if they want to come apart for you. And I will say, you don't need to overload these with a lot of meat because you're going to be putting a nice chicken fillet in here as well. And you don't want it to be like that big of a sandwich. Although my husband is like, add more meat. But a little goes a long way too. My husband would be like, I'll just take the meat and cheese. But these salami and the pepperoni are going to add to that kind of that Italian flavor, which we'll pick up in those spices that we marinated the chicken in. And then I'm just going to put a little dollop of marinara on it to kind of bring all those flavors together as well. There we go. Okay, this round of chicken should be ready. I'm going to put them on my plate first before I put them on the sandwiches. That way they'll drop off a little bit of the juice. And then so we've got nice golden sear on that. And then we're going to add in our last bit of chicken here. And these are smaller, so they're going to cook up pretty fast. I'm going to turn my pan down just a smidge because we got a little bit of oil left in here. Okay. And we'll let those kind of sear up. Now for our fun part. I'm going to turn off our soup. We're going to let it kind of cool down because we're going to blend this into a nice puree in my Vitamix here. So let me first slice up my red onion. I forgot I have some red onions going on our sandwich. So I'm going to slice those up nice and thin and add them on there. And do them really thin. That way you get that flavor, but you don't have too much of a crunch.
You have a question? What type of bread are you using for the sandwiches?
So these are leftover rolls that I made last night for dinner. So we had about 6 left over. And they are a sourdough discard yeast roll, meaning they have yeast in it, so about 2 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, and then they have a 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. And then I just kind of season them with an onion herb butter and some poppy seeds on them. There we go.
So you got a comment earlier, they like your butter sign. Where did you get it?
I actually picked that up from the farmer's market here in town several years ago. It was just, our farmer's market is kind of like a craft fair. And so I got it there. And I think it's so cute. I'm normally like not a huge person for the signs and everything like that. I have a couple throughout the house, but I mean, it's just cute. Okay, our chicken is kind of there because we'll pop that in. Let me move this guy out of the way now. And we'll put our marinara sauce once we take the sandwiches out of the oven because we don't need that to get to be molten hot when we're putting it on. Okay. Let me slide my kitchen or my Vitamix over here. You could use any blender. For the longest time, I just used my little Ninja on there. But we're going to ladle this in here and then we're going to blend it up. That way we have a nice, smooth, creamy soup. Now, I am going to add in a little bit of half and half because I want to put a little bit of calories in for Teddy. But this soup, you don't need to. It's creamy enough without it.
You have a question? As kids, did we ever go to the Iowa State Fair?
Yes, I went to the Iowa State Fair. I actually did, and my husband did too. I actually competed in the like the greased pigs where you had to catch a greased pig. I did not catch it, but I did that competition there. And the butter cow, you got to see the butter cow or the butter statue. But yes, we always went to the Iowa State Fair. And then, you know, I grew up in Ames, Iowa. So we had, I don't think they have it anymore, but they had Visha, which was a big festival that they did in Ames as well, which is kind of like a fair too. Okay, let's get our sandwiches assembled and then we're gonna pop them in the oven in just a second here. Okay, so I'm just gonna place, and I'm gonna try to do it on my, I think these inner pieces are my my flat part, not my rounded part of the bun. And then there will be, of course, 2 tasty chicken treats left over. They will get eaten. They're hot, so I'm telling my husband not to steal them now. And let's go pop these in the oven to kind of start heating them up and kind of toast them. He's contemplating, but I'm like, I know him. I can handle a lot of temperature heat. My husband cannot. Okay, this is perfect timing. Ooh, look how beautiful they look. I'm gonna pop these in right underneath this. They're looking great. They're almost done. They'll be ready in about 4 minutes, and that's when our sandwiches will be ready. But let's finish up our soup, and then we can take them out. I gotta make a glaze to go on top of our turnovers in just a second too. So we are getting down to the final countdown. Let's get our soup in here. Now, if there's 2 ways I like to do soups. Sometimes I take it all and I blend it all nice and creamy. And then sometimes I like to leave about 1/4 of it in there. That way I have a couple chunks in it. Since I have Teddy today with his recovering from his tonsillectomy, I'm going to take it all out and blend it smooth. That way it's there won't be any chunks or anything that could hurt him. Although he surprisingly has done fairly well, you know, eating, he's been loving muffins right now. Okay, we're gonna slide this on here. Make sure your lid on your blender is secured because the steam can kind of build up in there. And let's see, I want it on this one. Let's see. I'm using my hot food setting on my Vitamix. It's bougie, but you can just blend it at a medium if you want to. Perfect. But it's fancy. It starts low and then once it's got it, it goes high so you don't have like a steam buildup. Here we go. Look at that. The steam. There we go. And then we're just going to pour this back into our pan. And so we've got this nice, rich tomato basil broth that you can see how thick it is for it. It's very creamy on its own. And we didn't add any cream yet, but you can see it looks like there's cream in there. But that's just what happens when you blend it. I am going to add in a little bit of half and half. That's going to cut down on the acidity, which I think will make it a little bit smoother for Teddy. And it gives it a richer flavor. Just going to add in like 1/3 or 1/4 of a cup.
Do you have a question? Do you have your blender in your shop?
I think I have the Vitamix in my shop. I'll have to look to see if it is, but I'm pretty sure I have it in there. in there. I love it. It's a great blender. I will say they are pricey, but they are worth the cost. Let me grab a spoon here. We're going to taste it, see if we need to add any more spices. Perfect. I use just that chicken bouillon to spice it up, and I will say that adds a perfect amount of spiciness to it. When I added my half and half at the end, I have turned off my stove because a lot of times if you cook with the milk, it will curdle the longer you cook it. So I'm just allowing the residual heat from the Dutch oven to keep it warm. And while we're waiting, let's make up our glaze for our turnovers that are about to come out of the oven. So in my pan, I have some butter here. A bowl. You're right, it is a bowl. A little bit of butter melted. And that's going to give me a little bit creamier of a glaze on here. It's actually kind of thickened up. Here, I'm going to go pop it in the microwave for 5 seconds. Okay, but if you guys want to come over here, my turnovers are about to beep in a minute. I melted it before. I should have made it sooner, but it's in the end, it's fine. Okay, both things are going off at the exact same time. So here are our gorgeous turnovers. Look how beautiful they look. I'm going to turn off my oven, but I'm going to leave those sandwiches in there for just a second. We'll grab them in just a second. But how beautiful. This is that egg wash on it gives it that shiny, darker brown color. Because if you look at the sides where some of that egg wash didn't touch, it would be a very muted color, a very pale one. So that's the nice thing about using an egg wash. It's going to give you that rich color. Let me grab my bowl. There we go. So I've got my melted butter now. And we're going to make our glaze. And we're going to add in just a smidge of vanilla, like a half a teaspoon. Do a couple drops here. That's going to give it a nice flavor that I think go well with this. And then I'm going to start with a half a cup of powdered sugar and about a tablespoon of cream. Again, I eyeball everything. But those are my eyeball measurements, what I think they are, what they look like to me.
How long total do the sandwiches need in the oven?
I turned it off. They're ready to come out. I'm just keeping them in there nice and hot. That oven was set at 400. So you just are waiting for that cheese to melt. Everything is cooked through, but you want to have that melted cheese on it. So it's about 5 to 6 minutes. So they don't need very long. Okay, got our base here. I'm going to make it a little bit thicker because I want it to be kind of like a thicker glue kind of glaze to drizzle nicely, but not be too thick. I don't want it to be a frosting. Okay, we're going to blend this here. There we go. So you see we've got a nice thick drizzle. Think about if you ever had those toaster pastries when you were a kid and the little frosting pouches. Think about how you drizzled them over your toaster pastry. My husband loves those. I don't know why, but he absolutely loves them. And I'm like, I have perfectly good ones here. So before we drizzle, I'm just going to go take those sandwiches out because I don't want them to cook any longer. I'll put them right here. And then we'll be ready to serve up. Okay, so you can see a few areas where the cheese is poking through, but it's nice and melted. And then what I just like to do is we're just going to put our tops right over them, just like this. And so you bake them open-faced because otherwise it's really hard for them to kind of heat up. Beautiful. So now we've got this gorgeous sandwich here. And let's drizzle this. Let's see. Maybe need a splash more cream. Thickened up just a second while I walked away. Now, you always got to be careful with like powdered sugar. A little bit of liquid can go a long way.
You got reminded of marinara.
Yes, I know. I saw that when I walked over here. It might be a dip. I'll try to open them up and put it back on there. But yes, I know I saw that. I'm like, ooh, forgot the marinara. But let's drizzle our kind of creamy butter, vanilla, and powdered sugar glaze. This is going to give an extra bit of sweetness to our nectarine turnovers. That will just be a delicious treat on here. And I think it's a great way to use right now. It's kind of peach and nectarine season, and this recipe is interchangeable with peaches. So be delicious. And you don't have to wait until you're at, a bakery or, a farmer's market. I always feel like you can get turnovers at farmer's markets. Okay. Let's drizzle this over. And you want to put the glaze on while it's still hot, because it will continue to kind of melt over the sides and it won't be like a frosting. As you can see, the first ones, they've already kind of melted, and it just kind of coats it a little bit better. Versus if you wait till the top, then it's going to be more like a frosting on it. Okay, let's put our marinara sauce in. I'll have to do a little bit of surgery here. So just kind of spoon it.
You have a question? Do you have the recipes posted anywhere?
So we will upload our videos to the link on our page. So anytime you want to recreate any of our recipes, that is a great way to do it, because you can just watch the video and cook with me from this beginning to end. For our members, we do offer some recipe cards for our members. We kind of release 3 recipes a week, or recipe cards a week for them. But the videos are always free for everyone. So you can always just rewatch and create, cook along with me again. Okay, guys, let's get ready to serve up our delicious lunch here today. So again, these are just a great way if you have extra rolls. You don't just have to eat your rolls the same way, you can make them this way. Oh, I forgot. I even have tomato basil soup. I'm already looking over at the other stuff. Let me get a cauldron for my tomato basil soup. Okay, let's bring this right over here. So we're going to start. I'm going to ladle it over here. So this is our creamy tomato basil soup made with 8 fresh vine-ripe tomatoes, fresh basil, onion, and then we added just a little bit of half and half and chicken stock at the very end. And then we'll serve it with our Italian chicken melt, which is made on our sourdough discard rolls. We have havarti cheese, hard salami, pepperoni. We did an Italian marinade on the chicken, and then some red onions and a little dollop of marinara. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, we have our delicious nectarine turnover with a homemade butter vanilla glaze. And those spices inside, it has a nice cinnamon spice in there. We sweetened it with brown sugar and just a little bit of lemon juice for a perfect kind of treat, summertime treat. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, show you what we're making, and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we cooked, Italian chicken melts and tomato basil soup and nectarine turnovers, and watch along and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our kitchen gadgets and cooking gear that we use. So I'm pretty certain my blender's in there, but I got my Le Creuset pots, my baking sheets, even my utensils that you guys can check out if you want to. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.